Hey everyone, I'm Dan Crum, and I'm going to show you how to turn this into this. I've changed a lot of tambourine heads, and it's easy to get a replacement kit. Usually what I use is one of the ones from Grover or from Black Swamp. They come in a tube like this, and inside you've got a rubber band, some instructions, and your tambourine head. The first thing you want to do is get the head out, put it in a plastic bin, and fill the bin up with some warm water until the head is completely covered. You're going to leave it like that for about 2 hours. While you're waiting for that head to set up, you're going to prepare the tambourine. So that's going to be taken off the head, removing any tacks that are on it, and then you're going to be left with some glue around the edge. So we're going to get rid of that. What I recommend is you just get some sandpaper, sand it down lightly, make sure you've got mostly wood and not mostly glue left over. You'll see just a little color difference there on the edge. So we're going to take everything off of here. If you got any rings or heads, just kind of peel them off. And then we got a bunch of glue up here. Just going to take some sandpaper, go around the inside. Sometimes it's also really helpful to put your sandpaper over a block of wood like this and just fold it a little bit so you're guaranteed that the side you're using is totally flat to the edge of the tambourine shell, like this. Once the head's ready to go, you're going to notice it's a little slimy and goobery. It needs to stay wet while we do this, but it shouldn't be like dripping with water. So I usually just flip it on a paper towel or on a bath towel or something like that just to get that extra water off, and then set it aside. We'll be ready to go in a minute. On the rim of the tambourine you've prepared, you're going to put a bead of wood glue. You're just going to spread that out with your finger so it's smoothly covering the whole thing. There's not like big blobs of it sticking around. If there's any excess glue, you want that to go to the outside of the tambourine instead of the inside. So when the head is curled over, you're going to get a little extra contact right there. A lot of the instruction guides will tell you to put the head on top of the tambourine, but I actually do this opposite. I set the head down on the towel or the table or whatever I'm using, and I flip the tambourine upside down. So what I'm going to do is turn this thing over, and it does have glue on the rim. I'm going to grab it with my thumbs right here, hold it to the outside so now I have my fingers clear. So now I can touch the head underneath and feel that I'm lined up. And I can just look and see that I'm basically in the center. Set it straight down, just like that, and I'll give it a little bit of a wiggle just to make sure I've got full coverage of the glue on both the head and the jingles. Now the next step is where they tell you to put the rubber band over the top of the tambourine, and this is where I used to get stuck. It sounds simple enough, but when you actually try to do it, you'll realize two things right away. Number one, you've got a slimy, slippery tambourine head on slimy, slippery wood glue. Number two, the rubber band is a rubber band, so as soon as you stretch it out, it's going to try to pull back together. If you don't get it lined up just right on the head, you're going to end up squeezing the head together, getting wood glue all over everything, and it's going to be a catastrophe. What I used to do is have to get somebody to come in and help me, but at one point in time I got stuck and I was all by myself and I didn't have that option. So what I've learned is when it's sitting on the table like that, upside down, we're actually going to use the jingles and some triangle clips to stabilize the whole thing. I'm going to peel these over the jingles like this, and then I'm going to attach a triangle clip at several locations to lock the head into place. Now that you've got it locked down like that, you can flip it back over, put the rubber band on a lot easier without danger of it slipping all over the place and getting out of alignment. Now I have had an especially large amount of difficulty with this particular tambourine because the rim is very thin, so I'm actually bringing in an assistant in this case to help me out. So we're going to stretch it this way and then open, and we slide it down real careful, a little bit further, just like that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
After that, you can take the clips off because you don't need them and just open that head back up. As it dries, it's going to get stuck however you leave it, so you want to make sure it's in a way that once you cut it, you're going to be able to actually get it off the tambourine, not have it hung up on the jingles. Before you leave it to dry, you're going to want to go around the edge with a pair of needle nose pliers and just pull it a little bit to make sure it's all evenly balanced. No big ripples or bumps or bulges anywhere in it. As it dries, it is going to pull tighter and even out some of its own inconsistencies, but you want to make sure that its starting point is pretty good. Be careful that you don't pull it really tight. You should be able to push down in the middle of it with your finger, have it give just a little bit. If you pull it too tight, then as it dries and pulls, it's either going to break the head or it's going to crush the shell, and then you're going to buy a new tambourine. Leave it in a cool place out of direct sunlight and just let it dry on its own. If it dries too fast, there's going to be problems, so just someplace out of the way. After it's dry, you can get out a box cutter or a razor blade, X-Acto knife, something like that, and just carefully go along the edge and trim it right above where the jingles are. And that'll get you some grip on the side, plus where the glue is across the top, and you should be good to go. So it's the next day. You can see we've got a rubber band on. Everything is nice and dried. Pitch is pretty high as far as pitches on a tambourine head go, but that's okay. So I'm just going to peel off this rubber band. You can see where the fluting is, where the holes go for the jingles. We're just going to trim carefully right along this edge so it looks like a regular tambourine. Your first time around, you're not trying to cut the whole thing off, you're just trying to set a good line, and then you can take another light pass. If you push too hard, you're going to start cutting the wood of the tambourine, and if you're going to be replacing heads, relatively often over a couple of years, you could end up doing some damage to your hoop, so make sure you're not pushing too hard. And now we've trimmed the head off right here. I did have to finish this with a straight razor blade, sliding along the edge just a little bit. Looks like a tambourine. Now you've got a working tambourine, but I did say we were going to make it look like this. So what you're looking at there is a sandpaper ring. You can get something like this from Grover that they call the roll ring. We don't have to get into my whole life story, but what it comes down to is I was trained to use beeswax on the head and then lick my fingers to get this sort of tension, stick and slip technique for finger and thumb rolls. After about 10 years though, what I discovered was that my hands are really dry, and so anytime I put moisture on them, they dry up immediately in a couple of seconds, and they're really smooth because basically everything in the world sands them flat. Basically, I got to the point where artistically I was spending the majority of my time figuring out when to lick my fingers next because I couldn't do anything without doing that about every 3 to 5 seconds. The sandpaper then is an alternative to all of that because you don't need any moisture to get the friction effect for your thumb and your finger rolls. The way you lay it out is pretty simple. Grover sends out these things called roll rings with a lot of their tambourines now. When I first got one, I was really excited. What I found after my first sort of vigorous rehearsal, though, was that the ends of my fingers were bleeding a little bit because I think the grit on the sandpaper is just a little too coarse. After about 1.5 years of research and development, I settled on the following solution. Regular, non-adhesive backed 320 grit sandpaper. This gives you just enough friction to get the technique down, but it's not so coarse that it'll file your fingers down. So your skin stays intact, especially after you've gotten used to it a little bit, you build up some calluses on the ends of your fingers. So we've got our tambourine, and this is a Grover roll ring. You can see if you set it down here, it doesn't quite go to the edge of the tambourine, and it doesn't quite go all the way around. It leaves an open grip. Now I actually don't need all of this. I only ever go up about this far. So I'm actually going to go straight across to build my own ring. So I'll take my regular sandpaper, 320 grit, paper backing, no adhesive backing. I'm just going to lay this down on top of it like this. We're going to go just trace it till we go straight across. Just hold it down to your fingers. I'm going to go basically from my thumb to my pinky. And we're ready to cut. And there's our roll ring. Of course, if you have a different size tambourine or you don't have a roll ring to use as a model, you can get out a simple compass. The standard tambourine sizes are 8, 10, and 12 inches across. This is a 10 inch, so you can just set that compass to draw just inside of 10 inches, make your circle, and then come back an inch or maybe 3 centimeters or something like that for a slightly wider ring, and do it again, and then cut it out just like we did. To put the ring on the head, we're actually going to use the same wood glue that we used to put the head on the shell. You put a bead on, you rub it out with your finger, make sure it gets all the way to the edges, and it's going to curl up a little bit. So then you're going to just lay it out very carefully, kind of squish it into place. Use a damp paper towel to get any of the excess up, because we're going to have to put some pressure on it to get it to lock into place. We don't want it to get glued to whatever we're using. Then you're going to stack some books or something heavy on top of it to apply clamping pressure. Leave it for a couple hours. You want to make sure the ring fits, so you just take it and set it on here. I usually take the round bump here and set it right over the top of whatever the first jingle is. Just slide it around until it basically looks right. I'm noticing that this is just a little far out right here, so I'm just going to trim it a little. I don't want anything hanging over the edge. If you've got anything hanging over the edge, the tendencies will be that when you pull it in and out of a bag, those little bits that stick over the edge are going to get caught, and you can end up ripping this thing off the surface of your tambourine or damaging it, and that's just a pain, considering the amount of work we've put in. Okay, so now, to make sure I lay this down properly, I know that when I put glue on the back of this, it's going to curl a little bit because it is paper with stuff on one side of it, and that's just what paper does when it gets wet. So what I'm going to do is, now that it's in the right place, I'm going to go straight across from the middle, put my finger down. I'm going to make a tiny mark right over this jingle and onto the sandpaper. And I want to make sure that that spot is the first thing I'm going to line up. Then I'm going to come over here over this other jingle. I'm going to do the same thing. If I've got these things lined up, and I'll do one more way over here. If I've got these three things lined up, no matter how curly or floppy or weird the paper gets, I know that this is working. Now it's time to put on the glue. It doesn't take very much, and I do recommend that you keep a damp paper towel nearby to wipe up any excess in case there's a mess. We'll put a very thin bead along the whole thing, and then with your finger, you just want to spread it out to the edges. A very thin coat all the way to the edge is ideal. If there's big globs of it, it's going to be a problem, so less is better. You can always apply a little bit more later, and as you go along, you'll pick up a little extra from some places that you can spread out to the others. You can see a little of that curling I was talking about. Wipe the excess off on your wet paper towel. Looks like we need just a little bit more right over here. Very good. All right. We're going to turn this over, pull in our tambourine. See how it's curling on me. I'm going to take this first dot, line it up right here. I'm going to try to touch the head as little as possible while I do this. I'm going to go around the edge and carefully line up this next dot. Right about there. Smooth this in. Now technically, if we've done this properly, this should basically already be in exactly the right spot. We're going to double check that, lightly going around here, and there it is. It is lined up. So we go around the edge, make sure it's down really good. Smooth it pretty hard. Because of course it wants to curl, and so you're going to have to press it in pretty good to make sure it doesn't. All right. At this stage we're almost ready, but we need to apply pressure straight down to hold this in place so that that tendency to curl doesn't peel it away and ruin the whole thing. So I'm just going to get a stack of nice heavy books, and then we wait again. Some heavy books indeed, and maybe some good reading recommendations as well. Now we're ready to take the books off. Just pick all this up. You see we didn't have any glue stick over, so nothing stuck on the top. And it's down nice and flat. No ripples, no bumps. Now seasonally, as the temperature and the humidity changes, you may see, the head will expand and contract. You may see this change a little bit, but I've had mine on like this for a couple of years at this point, have never really had any issues. And it happens with no need for moisture, no nothing, right off the bat. Now, the one thing I will say is that this is still exactly like it was when it came out of the box. And so the coarsest of the grains are still raised here. What I will frequently do is get a small piece of wood or something, and I'll just lightly sand it on the head like this to remove the coarsest of those grains right at the beginning, and that's just to preserve your fingers. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to go along to where each of these jingles is across the top row, and we're just going to put a little dot. So you'll see I've already got the dots from where I lined it up with my pen right here. And so we're just going to add the rest of them. So I've got my Sharpie pen. I'm going to reinforce this one on the first dot I made to line it up. Then I'll put a dot here, reinforce this dot, this one, and this one. And this is what you're going to use for your dynamics. Again, this comes from the Black Swamp Tambourine concept. They use clear heads so you can actually see the pins at the top of each of these. And so what I'm going to do is if I want to play a finger roll soft, I'm going to go from dot to dot. If I want it to be stronger, I don't have to dig in. I can just go further. And it's stronger to a third dot, etc. Very easy to control your dynamics that way. This is an idea that I took actually from string players. Sometimes stylistically, if they want to increase their volume without digging, they'll actually increase their bow speed. This is exactly the same concept. Because you're covering a greater distance, you're going to get a bigger dynamic. After all that, you're good to go. It's kind of like baking a cake. It's not going to be the only thing you do all day, but it does basically take all day. Make sure you got all the tools and stuff that you need before you get started, because once you're in process, you got glue and things like that to worry about. You don't want to get caught off guard. Step through the entire process in your head before you get going. Best of luck with your new tambourine head. Happy practicing.